I'm just going to jump right in with my video here. You may have to crank up your volume. Mine is cranked up all the way. So just hopefully everyone can hear it. And I'm just going to go ahead and start the video.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Rudolph. I'm the Extension Vegetable Specialist at the University of Kentucky. And today we're going to talk about getting your soil, getting your ground ready for cover cropping. So it can't all happen in one day. And so that's something to keep in mind. You've got to be watching the weather, and several different implements need to be utilized in order to get the ground appropriately ready to seed. And so we're going to lead you through the chronological process of how to get the ground ready and what different equipment needs to be used or could be used in order to prep the ground and then seed. So stay tuned.
So here is an example of the initial field conditions that a diversified vegetable grower might experience or have on their farm. So an aerial shot, the winter cover crop that this is referring to is cereal rye, and then we had beets and broccoli there. So you can kind of see the residue that was left behind with the broccoli planting and the weeds that are there, and also the broken up cereal rye, and you can see there's a lot of clods. So here's a way to test soil moisture to see if it's appropriate to work the field, work the soil. So you can do a soil test with a shovel, right? You want to get at least 6-8 inches deep. You can see it's crumbly, but not dusty, and there's still some moisture. Soil probe may be even better if you have one, and it allows you to go fairly deep, 12 inches. You can see it's moist but crumbly. And that's about the perfect moisture for that. Here is a flail mower. And so this field in particular, you're gonna see has been mowed once already. And it is the cereal rye was knocked down with the mower. And we're just going through one more time to knock down some of that cereal rye that kept growing, that wasn't killed after that first mow. And so it's getting pretty low to the ground. You can see the residue from that first mow and some of the weeds that came up too after that first mow, but you really can't see the soil. Then you're gonna go through with disking. So the purpose of disking is to really break up the clods, break up the residue. You're not really inverting the soil, or it's very minimal inversion. It's really about breaking up the soil and getting it ready for seeding. So, and you can see on this diversified ground that it goes over, it's going over the cereal rye. Now it's in what was broccoli. And you can see the soil moisture is kind of coming to the surface as it breaks up those clods. The soil's getting darker because that moisture is more visible now. It's at the surface. And here's a really great slow motion shot of what this disking looks like. You can see some residue in there. There's some broccoli stems. And so there's one pass with the disc. There's residue there. The clods are quite small, but in truth, it may require a second pass. You can see that there is minimal dust in the air, right? And that's a good sign. This wasn't an extremely windy day, and the soil is not so moist that you'd risk creating compaction issues. In many cases, if you're following with a field cultivator, one disking event may be enough. So here's an aerial shot of disking, and the only reed, that middle portion was a radish, or excuse me, a beet trial, and that did eventually get disked and cultivated. And so here's that end result. You can see there's still some residue, of course, but it looks pretty good. Here's the field cultivator. This came a couple weeks after disking. So there was some pretty significant rain between the disking and the cultivation. So that's why you're seeing some of that crusty top of the soil. But the field cultivator really breaks up small weeds that have flushed after that disking. So the size of the weeds are really important. It's really not meant to get large weeds. So you see there are some pretty large weeds there in that shot, and this field cultivator is not equipped to really kill those. They might, but it's really targeted at smaller weeds that might appear 1 week or so after disking. And again, it doesn't go very deep, right? Or maybe 4 or 6 inches. And this is another part of prepping the soil, prepping the seed bed for seeding. So here's the hopper. This is a drill. So there's the hopper. You want to make sure the seed's evenly distributed and in that hopper, and then calibrate the seeder appropriately for your seeding rate. So there's the seed coming out, and this is a mix of millet and clover. And the seeding was done about 5 days after field cultivation, I would say. And ideally, you could follow immediately with seeding if you chose, if the weather permitted. So you can see here, it's creating a small furrow, and the seed gets dropped in between those 2 discs, those 2 plates. And then the wheels that are on the back end hover over that seed lightly. So there's nice seed-soil contact, which should promote germination. Certainly, you could use a broadcast seeder if that's what you had on hand. Drilling usually is thought to have a better success rate, but certainly with a grass cover crop, it wouldn't be unusual to use a broadcast seeding method.
Okay, so here's an example of what we would call a living mulch, a living ground cover. We've seeded teff, T-E-F-F, for those of you who are less familiar with it, in the alleyways here. It's about a 35 pounds per acre rate. We wanted really good coverage because this is the main purpose of the teff is for weed management. So you can see there's still some weeds dotting here and there throughout the field. For the most part, I think we've done a pretty good job of blocking out. Now, teff also has a lithopathic quality, so it basically can suppress other plants. So that's another form of weed management there. So what we're going to do, this teff is this was hand seeded and it's about 3 weeks long, and it's not irrigated. It was timed with multiple rain events. So basically we watched the weather until we saw that there were going to be several rainy days coming up, and that's when we seeded and it was raked in. So you can see here, pretty good coverage. There are a few weeds, but really not that bad. And this will need to be mowed. Probably in the next 2-3 weeks. We want to mow it before this squash starts creeping into the alleyways. So we don't want to damage the squash. So that's something to keep in mind. Certainly, if you had a non-binding crop, you could time it a little differently. Maybe let the tent go a little longer. I would expect if you didn't mow it, I would expect the tent to get at least, thigh high on me. So probably about 2.5 feet before it started going to seed. So you've got some time before you need to decide what to do, but it's something to consider. Okay, so this is an example of cover cropping in a high tunnel. We've got a mix here. So this was hand seeded and raked in with a rake. And then we've got a mix of Japanese millet and crimson clover. So this is about 2 weeks along. And we've got irrigated using sprinkler system. As you can see, the stand is pretty good. There's a little bit of a slight difference as you get really close to the sprinklers, but for the most part, the stand's pretty even. And we've got good coverage here. So the millet came up a lot faster than the crimson clover. You can see the crimson clover down there below here. And so this is kind of an experiment. This is about 2 parts millet to 1 part crimson clover. So we'll see how this does. But it's a warm season, cover crops. Because we're in a high tunnel, we needed to irrigate. And this is just an option for growers that are trying to rotate, practice good crop rotation, and maybe do some soil health improvements during the summer.